The proceeding will start shortly. 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 The proceeding is currently in private. 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 The proceeding is currently in private.
Order. I open the session this afternoon. Commissioner, welcome. It's very good to have you before us, and also, obviously, this is the first time you've given formal evidence to us since you took up post, and we are very glad to have you here. We wanted to ask you about a range of policing and crime and counter-terror issues. Can I start by just raising with you a couple of topical issues where concerns have arisen over the last couple of weeks. First of all, there have been some serious allegations appeared in the papers made by the First Secretary of State and Minister for the Cabinet Office that former Assistant Commissioner in the Met, one of the most senior police officers in the country, has leaked false information from a confidential inquiry for personal or political reasons. Clearly, this is a significant issue, even if the former Assistant Commissioner, Bob Quick, is no longer in post, and even if, as we understand, there is currently a Cabinet Office investigation underway at the moment. Could you have, obviously this also reflects investigations that I know you will have been involved in some years ago, so could you comment on this case and tell us how you think these allegations should be dealt with now?
Well, thank you very much indeed, Chair, and I'm delighted to be here. In relation to these matters, I am not going to comment on an apparently or allegedly leaked set of information from a confidential investigation. And in not commenting, I am absolutely not, therefore, either confirming or denying what may or may not have been uncovered in that investigation. What I can say is that, of course, if the Metropolitan Police, or indeed I myself, can assist a Cabinet Office inquiry, we would want to do so, and we would seek to do so. And secondly, if I could turn to matters of principle, quite clearly it is absolutely fundamental that information in confidential inquiries is kept confidential. The public rightly expect very high standards of protection of information from police officers and police organisations. And we would do everything we can to try to keep the information that has been given to us for a particular purpose confidential. Now, in my next comment, I am not commenting in any way at all about what Assistant Commissioner Quick may or may not have done, because I don't know. But what I can say is that it is, whether you are serving or not serving, absolutely imperative that confidential information is kept confidential. And the only times in which it might be appropriate to breach that confidentiality, for example, in a criminal investigation where material has been given for a particular purpose, is where there is an overwhelming public interest. And we would, as an organisation, always want to look at a public interest case before we passed information to anybody else, for example, even a select committee. And as an individual, should one fear somebody's life is at risk, or perhaps hypothetically that a gross miscarriage of justice has taken place, then it might be appropriate to break that confidentiality, but there would be ways in which it is done. But I must repeat, I'm not commenting here on what AC Quick may or may not have done, because I don't know, and nor am I confirming or denying what that investigation may have found out. I'll go back to say I'd be delighted if the Metropolitan Police can assist the Cabinet Office in their inquiry in any way. And then I think we need to go step by step. If Mr Green wishes to make an allegation to my organisation, or indeed to the Independent Police Complaints Commission, that might be something he would wish to do.
And so, aside from anything that the Cabinet Office may raise or may ask you to do, given this is obviously a former officer and events that took place some years ago. Do you think that, aside from anything you may be asked to do by the Cabinet Office, do you think that there is more that the Metropolitan Police itself should do on this issue?
I'm sorry, Chair, I don't want to comment any further. I do want to take these matters step by step, and at the moment there is a huge amount of speculation and misinformation, no doubt, I'm sure, and third-party comments on this, that and the other, and I think we should go step by step through this.
Thank you. We do not want to contribute to any further confusion on this issue. Can I then turn to another also very current issue? You'll obviously be aware of the concerns about unreported sexual assaults and crimes that have been raised in Westminster and political parties, but also in other institutions as well. Clearly there has to be a huge amount of work done by those institutions, in Parliament, by political parties to deal with this, make sure there's proper support, independent processes and culture change. Yeah. But also I wanted to ask you about the policing aspect to this, because some of those who have spoken out have said they did not report cases to the police because they feared they might not be believed. Do you think that the police have done enough to improve support for victims of crime, for those who need to raise their concerns, both to improve support for them but also to instil confidence?
Well, I'm sure there is even more we can do to instil confidence, but I do think we've made huge strides over the last several years, and I think we are seeing that. For example, when I speak to organisations that support victims of serious sexual assault, they would say that confidence is higher amongst the people who come to report to them in the first instance. They themselves have more confidence in the way in which we will both investigate and support complainants and victims. We, I think, are generally regarded, I don't want to sound complacent about this, but in the forefront of the world in respect of this. But clearly, if somebody has been assaulted, particularly a sexual assault, there are lots of things that they have to think about. We are absolutely sure that we're getting higher levels of reporting and therefore recording now proportionately than we ever have, i.e. of all the assaults that take place, a higher number come to see us and talk to us about that. They may or may not wish a criminal justice outcome, but they are feeling more confident. But I'm sure there is absolutely there is more that we can do.
There's a massive gap between the numbers reported and the number of convictions.
There are.
Why do you think that gap is still so large?
I think there's lots and lots of reasons for that. We are seeing a very large increase. Many of the people who come to talk to us and then we end up recording a crime are extremely vulnerable in a number of different ways. And secondly, a high proportion, the circumstances are quite sort of contested, if you like, and there is often not very much other corroboration. So we do work really closely with the Crown Prosecution Service, and I think there have been huge improvements in our joint working, and clearly the courts also, and some of the law has changed to make it more supportive, if you like, for the victim. But it is still a very large step, and on occasions, on a number of occasions, there is simply not the evidence to meet the evidential test that the CPS would apply.
And if those sexual assaults take place within the workplace or within institutions, is your experience that the cooperation between institutions and the police is effective, or do you tend to experience resistance from institutions or workplaces when investigating those sorts of allegations and crimes?
Goodness me, I think my experience is that I've been a police officer 35 years. The world has changed enormously, and more institutions are very aware and very alert and have very good human resource sort of processes and good avenues for grievance and dealing with issues in the workplace, and also a very good understanding of the sort of thing that ought perhaps properly to be referred to the police. I think it's very rare when the police, as it were, arrive for us to meet resistance. But there are clearly occasions where it may be I mean, I can imagine many occasions where it's possible that somebody reports something to somebody more senior or somebody more powerful in an institution, and they are either put off from going to the police, wittingly or unwittingly, or they're not sort of given, factual information about what would happen next. And so for us, there's a really, important piece of work which is always going on, particularly with large employers, to make sure they understand when we would get involved and should get involved, and when this is something that ought perfectly properly to be dealt with through the disciplinary or misconduct processes.
And are there any cases then, in your experience, or any that you were aware of, where around either assault allegations or sexual assault allegations, there has been any occasion where either Parliament or political parties or similar institutions have not cooperated sufficiently or effectively with the police when making those sorts of investigations and inquiries?
Clearly, I can't speak for everybody in my organisation, and I could write back with further and better information if that would help. But my sense is that it's certainly in latter years we haven't met any resistance or sort of inadequacy once we arrive, if you like. And you'll be very well aware that the matter that you mentioned first resulted in some quite considerable changes in the relationship between the police service and Parliament, and some greater systematising of certain processes, for example, when we need to retrieve evidence from the parliamentary estate. We have, I think, really good cooperative working relationships with the parliamentary authorities. We have officers here who are very expert on the law in relation to this, and indeed parliamentary processes. So I am not personally aware of any where we have met difficulties. Absolutely not.
Thank you. I think if you do have any further reflections on that, or any further reflections on any changes that you think would be helpful in terms of making sure that crimes can be brought to justice, obviously given the timing of both Parliament and political parties making changes in the way in which they operate, we would obviously appreciate any further reflections or views that you might have in writing would be very welcome.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. I might just say one thing, which is that I am, of course, anxious to ensure that the processes that the various institutions are creating as we speak do have sufficient linkage with other organisations who can give support, and that it is not a matter of inevitably referring everything to the police and then we are the signpost to the support. There's lots of support that could be given to parliamentary parties, as you know, or indeed to Parliament, from other organisations that will support victims, for example, very well. It doesn't need police involvement necessarily.
Thank you. Can I turn now to funding
Yes.
issues, which obviously are a particular concern for the Met at the moment. Can you tell us what funding cuts you are expecting in your budget between now and 2020, and what reduction you would expect to see in the number of Met police officers in order to deliver that scale of cuts?
So there are obviously very many unknowns between now and 2020 in terms of inflation, in terms of the exchange rate, in terms of pay, settlements. I could go on. You'll be very familiar with that. But on our current best calculations, we believe, having found savings over the last several years of between 600 and 700 million, we will need to find further savings. We have pressures of £400 million. And you'll be aware, I think, that the Met have made savings in a number of different areas. So in our estate, in our procurement, we've lost a very large number of members of police staff. So head for head, about the same number of people have gone from the Met proportionately as any other police service. But we have to, and there are a number of other areas, technology, of course, in particular. We have to date protected police officer numbers to a large degree. We believe that there is certainly more efficiency and productivity that we can gain, and we intend to over the coming years. Happy to talk about that. But that notwithstanding, we do believe our planning assumption at the moment is that if it is 400 million and if things stay pretty much as we see them, the caveats at the beginning, we will go down to somewhere in the 27,000s, between 27.5 and 28,000 perhaps.
So that's a reduction of what, just to clarify?
Well, we're currently bobbing around at over 30,000, which of course is much less than we have been at our peak.
So you'd expect a loss of about 3,000 officers, about 10% of the officers?
Again, yes,
yeah.
Potentially. That's what we're looking at the moment, if the funding stays as it currently is.
And what's the consequence of that in terms of service?
Well, it's not straightforward, clearly. It doesn't fill me with any joy at all. I think, and clearly you'll be aware that we're doing this against a background, and I know colleagues have spoken about this before, but I do believe it is, I don't talk in hyperbole, but I do think it is genuinely sort of unprecedented, certainly in my policing time, to have crime going up as it has, violent crime going up as it has, the threat changing in terrorism as it has, calls going up as they are, complexity of what we are being asked to deal with and the expectations of how we will deal with, for example, online crime or child sexual exploitation as an example. This all does feel unprecedented. So the consequence of that is we have to do our level best to be efficient. We have to do our level best to take demand out of the system through technology and in other ways. But I would say if we go down to that level, we absolutely will have to look at whether we can be quite as front-footed as I would like us to be, proactive, doing as much as I would like us to do on prevention. We probably can't. We'll have to be really ruthless about some demands, I think. And we will not be able to invest in the way I would like in improving our capability, for example, in child sexual exploitation, certain aspects of serious and organised crime. So you'll be aware we have been, as other police chiefs have, been talking with the government about this position. I completely respect it's political decisions. My job is to advise on consequences and impact, but I am very concerned about it. If right now, if we got some more funding, I would feel more confident about our ability to deal with violent crime and our ability to keep on investing in neighbourhood and local policing.
And I'm not quite clear from what you said, because when you sort of described it as, well, not being front-footed, it's hard to understand what that means in terms of actually the impact in service terms. Sure. What this really means, when you talk about not being able to respond to violent crime in the same way, what in practice does that mean you will not be able to do?
So right now, we have, over the last 18 months, in London suffered quite a considerable increase in certain types of violent crimes, knife crime, gun crime in particular, moped-enabled crime. We may well come back to these. Through a Herculean effort over the last few months, I think we've stemmed the tide of that increase, primarily through enforcement measures. I certainly hope so. And I would like to continue to be able to bear down, that's a priority for me, is bearing down on violent crime in all its forms, sexual offences, domestic violence, street crime, and of course terrorism. But I came in at a time where we were seeing some very significant increases. Without more funding quite soon, I am really concerned that will be very difficult to maintain, that getting a grip and seeing a reduction again in violent crime. As an example, I am really concerned that we won't be able to respond to what I anticipate will be one of the logical conclusions of the counter-terrorist contest strategy review, which is that we all need to do quite a bit more in certain local areas through neighbourhood policing, as one example, to stop people from becoming violent extremists. I am concerned that other aspects of sort of preventative work, as opposed to just straight law enforcement, will be very hard for my service to do. And I believe that we are good at preventative work, and I also think it's really, really important in the long run for reducing crime and increasing public confidence, which are my two big things.
And what is the kind of preventative work, particularly, for example, around extremism and counter-terror? What is the kind of prevention work that you think is effective, that is really hard to do if you haven't got enough resources?
Mm-hmm. Well, I know you've heard from Assistant Commissioner Rowley, and he will have talked about the preparedness and the fact that, in the 7 days after each of these ghastly attacks we've had this year, for every one person who was a counter-terrorist specialist involved in the direct response, 2 others were not specialists. Some of them would be neighbourhood officers, some of them would be firearms officers, a whole variety of people. If I take the Finsbury Park attack, terrible event, as an example, that's absolutely the case there again, that for days afterwards the response is more from the generalists than it is from the specialists. But talking to people in that local area, equally importantly, they know their local officers. They understand what the local officers have been trying to do, and indeed have very successfully, I think, done in order to, in effect, bring communities together. A hugely contested part of London just 10 years ago has become somewhere which is very, very united, and one in which, I think community issues are dealt with extremely fast and extremely well and extremely sensitively by the local officers. If I take you back 10 years, you'll remember a raid on the Finsbury Park Mosque and how incredibly difficult that was. I am not suggesting for a second that we would need to raid the Finsbury Park Mosque now. I don't think we would. But if the counter-terrorist officers need to go and do operations in that area, they have neighbourhood officers who understand the location, who have their contacts, who know how to do things safely. So there's they bring legitimacy to the counter-terrorist officers. And then they are exactly the people, together with the PCSOs, that local people will say, I'm worried about Cressida, I'm worried about so-and-so, I'm worried about so-and-so. They are becoming, they've changed. Or I'm worried about, the fact that they're on the computer all the time, or I'm worried about the sulfuric acid I know they've bought. This is the neighbourhood officers who sort of glue communities together and glue the counter-terrorist officers to communities. I'm very concerned if we reduce the numbers of those. I actually think in certain areas we need to be doing a lot more work through them, with them, and of course other public authorities to stop people from becoming violent extremists.
Do you, I know other forces have already very substantially reduced neighbourhood police officers. Would you expect, if you have to go ahead with the 400 million cut, would you expect the number of neighbourhood or community police officers to reduce?
That would be, I've made a sort of commitment as Commissioner that I will have my 2 dedicated ward officers, which I pretty much do have, and schools officers as well. I would hate to go away from that commitment, but there are some areas where I've got more than that, and I think I need more than that, and I might have to start reducing those, definitely, if I went down to the 27,000 level. But it slightly depends on what happens. Events will clearly drive things a lot.
Of course. And then we ask you then as well about sort of in terms of the capacity to deal with just the full range of crimes, because you're not just the counter-terror. Your reports in the paper about there being a new crime assessment policy, and the Deputy Assistant Commissioner Mark Simmons has said it's not practical for officers to spend a considerable amount of time looking into something where the value of the item stolen is under £50. Does this mean the Met has just effectively stopped investigating small crimes?
No, it doesn't. I think I should reassure the committee, and indeed through this the public, that I don't believe that we are, through becoming more formal in this particular way, going to reduce the number of crimes that we bring to justice. What we are saying is we are trying to help our officers with the less serious crimes, may be, I'll come back to this, may be very important to an individual, but less serious crimes in general, we're trying to help them to think through how they assess, how they make decisions, and at what point it would be appropriate to say, I have not solved this one, which is what they do every day of the week anyway. So we've just helped them with how they do that. Now, if a crime which appears to be less serious is something which is having a big impact on an individual, or is linked to other crimes, or is in some other way sort of aggravated, then that would change things immediately. But the fact is, we do know that, much as I wish it wasn't this way, many crimes are not at all easily solved. In fact, some, however much resource you put in, would never be solved. So I don't see this as a major shift, and it's certainly not saying we're not interested in minor crimes now. It's simply saying and other forces have been doing this for a long time, by the way, in this formal way. It's simply giving better guidance to the response officer or the neighbourhood officer who's dealing with a crime about the things that will help it to be solved and the things that just won't.
We appreciate the significance of it. It would appear that the focus, certainly in what the Deputy Assistant Commissioner said, was around the value of the crime, as opposed to how easy or difficult it was to solve, and also the concern when you obviously raised the issue about prevention earlier on, that is there not a concern that if police officers across the Met feel as though they are being given a steer to back off some of the lower level crimes, or some of the crimes where the value of something that's been stolen is lower level, that what this will allow is a build up, and that people who start as low-level petty criminals can end up then becoming involved in more and more serious crimes because they get away with it, and then can get drawn into something that is much more difficult for the Met to deal with.
I can see how people, given the way it has, given the media coverage it has received, I can see why people would be concerned about that. Yes, I can. What I would say is this is not a dramatic change in policy. That we put, and I don't want to trivialise this, but that we put a huge amount of resource into a homicide investigation or rape investigation as compared to driving away and not paying for your petrol. It has always been the case. It's always been the case. What we're saying to the officers is if in the early stages of investigation there do not seem to be the following things which would help you to solve it, it's better to say stop than to say to the to the victim, well, I'll be back, I'll come and have another conversation with you, or we'll see, CCTV might turn up something if I can find any. Actually, this is a more coherent way of I think, giving a clearer, better service to victims, and secondly, ensuring that we concentrate on the things that do matter most.
Do you think there is public consent for this approach?
I think certainly at public meetings when I talk to people about it, they seem to understand it, and they also understand that it isn't actually very different from what has always happened in policing, which is that you look at what you've got, and you look at, the circumstances and the victim and the solvability and you make decisions based on that. That has been happening since time immemorial.
But then does that mean then that if you had more resources and were able to investigate more of those lower level crimes, do you think that would then help you prevent more serious crime later on?
I'm not saying we're not investigating low level crimes. I'm saying we're stopping investigating when they don't appear to be solvable. So I know what you're trying to get me to say, but I don't think I can necessarily agree with that. No, I think the inference that people would might take from this is that this is simply what we are doing because our budgets are shrinking, and it's not.
Stephen Doughty.
Thanks, Chair. Commissioner, pleasure to have you here today. I just wanted to ask some follow-up questions related to counter-terror operations. Obviously, we've seen a whole series of very serious events in London and, of course, across the rest of the country, and obviously a tribute to your officers and staff for the response that they've given. I wanted to touch on the funding issues, but I wondered if you could say a little bit about how the increased tempo of activity and obviously the seriousness of some of the incidents in London have affected sort of day-to-day operations in terms of shift patterns, ability to kind of absorb that, and whether you're having to adapt ways of working as well as funding to cope with the increased pressure.
Thank you. If I may just repeat the admiration that I have for the response of Met people, from those who showed extraordinary courage at the scenes of these ghastly incidents. The compassion, the resilience, the endurance, and the fantastic investigative capabilities that have been on display to all the world. Like everybody else, I, just so wish that none of this had happened, and that. But it is so, I think, very clear why I can sit here and say I'm very proud of them, and I do believe that we have the best global police service in the world, and long may it last. They, I think, are in very good heart, and the determination is clear. I think overall our shape, if I can put it that way, our strategy is also in good stead. And you could imagine how, after such terrible events and the demands that they put on, you could imagine, I think an organisation being more put out of shape is a bad way of putting it, but that's the phrase I want to use, than we actually are. But I think some people are tired, there's no doubt about that, and I've been putting an enormous amount of effort into trying to ensure that we look after them as best we can, we look after their shifts and their welfare as best we can, but there's undoubtedly some tiredness around. And we have, in the short term, for the sort of real generalists, we had to shift some shifts around for a while after each of the incidents, but in general most of them are working in the way they were, or working in the way they're working in a way which is now unaffected by the major incidents. Some of the specialists, firearms officers, counter-terrorist officers, are undoubtedly working at an extraordinary tempo, and I know Mark talked about this, but our best sort of estimates at the moment is having had 7 foiled attacks in 7 months, together with the ones which caused devastation and murder, together with actually Grenfell. On that has put a huge burden on the organisation, as it has on the city, and most of all on the people most affected. The tempo at the moment in the Counter-Terrorism Command is a kind of feeling of about 30% more workload. That's on the sort of investigative and intelligence side. We've then got more effort going into protecting events. Of course, we are learning the lessons of preparedness, and we're trying to do what we can on the prevent side as well. So it's putting a considerable strain on the organisation, I suppose, but and on policing generally.
Which would underline, in my view, the points that have been made already about the funding situation.
Yeah.
In terms of that specific specialist capacity, particularly the armed capacity, two questions really. Are you satisfied with how Operation Tempera operated when that was put into practice? And also, are you satisfied with the levels of recruitment and retention of armed policing capacity to cope with that increased pressure that there is obviously on the existing capacity?
So I would pay tribute to my predecessor and to Mark Rowley for the way in which they led our firearms uplift as a consequence of the terrible attacks in Paris in particular. And they also, or Mark in particular, also led the planning for Tempera with the military. And there'll always be things to be ironed out, but I actually thought Tempera worked extremely well. When we went to critical, and it was decided in 2 different circumstances this summer that it would be helpful to have further armed capacity brought into certain posts so that police officers with guns could go into different roles. It worked really very smoothly and very professionally, I felt, across the country. but also the fact that we were able to step back down very quickly was very important to me. And clearly that's not, I don't want to go to tempora ever again if I can avoid it, but we need to learn the lessons and make sure that if we had to, we could. We are finding actually in the Met that we have been able to recruit good quality officers for our uplift, and we are absolutely on track with that. And my sense when I talk to them is that their morale is high. That they obviously are very proud of the appalling but sort of necessary actions that their colleagues had to take in the attacks. That brings it home for all of us what that job involves. I think I can also say that historically the firearms officers have felt, and I have lots of sympathy with this, that they are sort of uniquely scrutinised because, of course, they have people's lives in their hands, and that scrutiny can take a very long time and not always feel very fair. That's a perspective. And I don't wish to take away from the perspective of the family involved in that either, but that's a perspective. I think they feel that both their leaders and those who are there to scrutinise them and those who hold them to account understand more the pressures that they're under and the way in which they go about their job. They now have body-worn video on all the uniformed firearms teams, so they know that their professionalism will be displayed, and they see that as a very good thing. So we're not struggling. Long answer, sorry. We're not struggling to get people in there, and they're working hard. They're doing a great job. They're extraordinarily capable. I'm very proud of them, and they seem to have a pretty high morale.
In terms of the surveillance and intelligence picture, it's been suggested that covert surveillance powers might come under EU scrutiny when the UK applies to have its data protection standards recognised after Brexit, in order, for example, to continue accessing EU databases such as SIS2. How would you assess the balance, Commissioner, of priorities between access to EU databases and the freedom to undertake covert surveillance methods, including bulk retention, for example, of data?
Goodness me. Well, that's a question for society in a sense, and for Parliament undoubtedly, and of course for lawyers and for the EU in this instance. We in policing, and I in particular, am absolutely clear that the kind of privacy security balance has to be something which we can give it an advice on, but not be the deciders of course. We use all sorts of powers all the time, and covert surveillance is an incredibly important one for us in a variety of different ways, but clearly the extent to which we use it and the way in which we use it must be always within the law and must be ethical. And as we go, into the sort of negotiations around security, if that's the right word, and Europe, clearly data adequacy is going to be a very, very important issue. I understand that. It's also an issue which is immensely complicated. I know this committee has an interest in it.
And have you had specific conversations with the Home Secretary or any of the Brexit ministers around the nature of those negotiations as they stand at the moment?
So in policing and law enforcement, some senior officers and the Director General of the NCA have been very clear to try to talk about the powers that we currently use. Powers is a broad term, and how we use them and the impact of using them. And to give, objective advice, if you like, about that. We wouldn't, I think, dream of getting involved in negotiating. That's absolutely not our job.
But you set out some red lines, essentially, as to what your requirements are as they stand.
We've talked about. I mean, there are many things that we currently do that we feel we need. To, in order to provide an effective service in the future, we need to be able to continue to do. Absolutely, yeah. Okay.
That's very clear. Just briefly on turning on to hate crime for a moment. I mean, obviously we've seen some pretty shocking trends, particularly in faith-related hate crime. I think up to 30% or so in the last 10 years, including specific rise in Islamophobic attacks, for example, in London and elsewhere. Obviously some worrying increases in LGBT plus related hate crime, particularly against the trans community. I just wondered if you could say anything about where you feel those trends are going, and particularly how the Met is responding to those and influencing the picture more widely at the moment.
So hate crime is an area that I've worked quite extensively in over the last much of the last 15 years. You mentioned a year-on-year increase, absolutely right, overall in hate crime. I have to say my view is that is very largely accounted for by increased reporting and better recording. There are a number of and increased confidence. There are a number of reasons for that, I think. One is, of course, quite a high proportion now is online, still potentially extremely nasty and offensive or worse, but more easily found on some occasions by, just as it's easier for somebody to think, well, I'll just say that online, no responsibility kind of thing. It's also easier for those things sometimes to be found, and a lot of third parties, for example, Community Security Trust, Tell Mama, are getting very good, as are we, at finding online hate crime. Secondly, I think a whole variety of measures that we've all taken in society and in policing and in institutions has increased people's confidence to come forward and to report. Part of that is about us being, really, really clear about the importance of this as an issue, about us taking victims seriously, which we do, and wherever possible bringing people to justice or ensuring they get the outcome that they would like to get. As you know, we saw a spike in particularly Islamophobic hate crime after the EU vote, and we saw another one after each of the attacks, not so large, and actually we didn't have one after Parsons Green. But what I can tell you is that the London level at the moment is back where it was before the attacks, and my overriding feeling is that this is very important. I'm not complacent. But when you look at the type of crime we're talking about and the volume that we're talking about, I think I honestly believe, because we're so transparent and people care a lot in London, which is a wonderfully integrated and diverse city, sometimes the outside world, perhaps internationally, can look in and think, goodness me, there's all that hate crime, and have they got sort of gangs of armed thugs going around with shaved heads attacking people? No, we haven't. We have a base level of 2 or 3 crimes per borough per day, online and off, the vast majority of which are at the very at the less serious end of the spectrum, and I do not believe the problem is getting worse, but I'm not complacent about that.
And just lastly, on that online aspect in particular, we've asked lots of witnesses before the committee, and obviously in the previous session Parliament had a number of technology companies in. Yeah. There is still very serious material online. We're told today, there's national action material still online on one platform. We know extremist content as well. Google Drive now being used as a place where material is being shared. Do you think, in summary, that the technology companies are doing enough?
I think they have been clearly trying to assist us more recently. So if we take terrorist material as an example, which you mentioned, potentially national action being prescribed, when I look back to when we set up the Terrorist Internet Referral Unit, which is in the Met and is the longest established such organisation in the world, we were getting very, very, very patchy assistance. We now get very good assistance, but I think they could do a lot more. I know it's technologically quite complicated. I know they've got some ethical issues. I know, but I think they could take the burden of this much further than they currently have, and I hope they do.
Beth Shaw.
Thank you very much. First of all, can I congratulate you on your appointment, because we had an election in between. It's the first time I've had a chance to meet you. So it's a pleasure to have you here. Can I also pick up on the hate crime things? In terms of the LGBT issue, my understanding is that the Met has a subgroup on issues related to LGBT issues, and in relation to, so you've got a silver group, and you've got working groups underneath diamond group, that works with LGBT issues, and rightfully so, and for disabilities. However, 80%, more than 80% of all hate crime is racially motivated, and there's no committee or subgroup that deals with that. So why has the Met failed to do that?
So I actually don't recognise quite what you're saying. I don't want to argue with you. But what I can say is that as the new Commissioner, I have taken over the personal leadership of diversity, community engagement and inclusion. And I am and will be chairing our strategy board that deals with that. We have quite a lot of experience, I think. We take race hate crime extremely seriously, and we have strong local independent advisory groups. We have a race hate advisory group and a whole series of other groups and standing committees, and we have had undoubtedly technical terms for us, diamond and gold groups in relation to specific issues. I'm not sure what your briefing is. I'm not denying it, but I absolutely don't recognise a picture that says we take race hate crime in any way less seriously than other hate crime. We absolutely don't.
Would you go away and look at that?
I will, certainly.
There is, please.
Absolutely.
I really value response.
I will,
to that.
for sure.
Thank you. I'd like to also congratulate the Met on being present at the launch of Islamophobia Awareness Month, which was this month. Mm-hmm. And in terms of hate crime and Islamophobia right now, so thank you for coming to the event, but also, what measures are being taken to tackle the rise of Islamophobia and attacks against Muslims, particularly visible Muslims? So we took some evidence. I'm also a member of the British Muslim APPG, and we took some evidence that actually it wasn't just people who, not just women in hijabs, but actually men who had beards, who were not necessarily Muslims, were also being attacked because they were visibly seen as Muslim, just simply because they were having a beard, and could be non-Muslims. Mm-hmm. So what are you doing about that?
So firstly, that's obviously completely unacceptable, and I think my officers, all of them are relatively well trained in this issue, and I would expect, and indeed do see, that they would take such a matter seriously if anybody reported to them in the street. We have on each borough, we have specific senior officers and liaison officers whose job it is to improve all the time the way in which we interact with particular communities, in this case Muslim communities, whose job it is to reach out into faith communities, whose job it is to make sure that each individual hate crime that is reported effectively. I myself go out and speak quite often on these issues, and we have, I think, ever improving kind of third-party reporting and relationships with both communities, neighbourhoods and institutions. And we also are quite prepared to highlight this issue when we see something which we think needs fixing. We're not afraid of dealing with it at all. We have a very good relationship with Tell Mama and other groups, and I'm absolutely determined that, particularly in the wake of the terrorist attacks, that all our communities feel kind of confident, and they feel confident in their police service, and that, to coin a phrase, the terrorists don't win by dividing London's communities. We are mainly very integrated.
Thank you. Well, my colleague Stouty spoke about, we did a hate crime inquiry and we talked about online hatred. But I'd like to bring you to the issue of print media and the role of print media. Would you share my concerns? I have huge concerns around really damaging headlines like 1 in 5 jihadis, and the kind of Muslim problem, the Trevor Kavanagh piece in The Sun recently, which the Jewish Board of Deputies wrote about, and certainly lots of MPs supported my call for a retraction. Would you agree with me that headlines and articles such as that fuel Islam, anti-Muslim rhetoric and Islamophobia? and we should be looking at that as well in terms of hate crime.
So, I don't have your experience, but this is an issue that I have wrestled with since 2001. Remember, I set up with my senior colleague the first Muslim Safety Forum in the Met immediately in the aftermath of 9/11, and I remember very similar things being said about headlines and the inflammatory effect they can have. And throughout my service, people have said to me, "Can't you do more about this, Cressida?" A variety of different issues. I do feel very strongly that people need, their police to be the police who enforce the law, and who don't become, as it were, thought police. Or we have to balance human rights, and freedom of expression is a very important one that should be balanced. So I don't think these things should naturally lend themselves to either policing unless it's against the law, or indeed strong comments from police officers. But I can absolutely see that some headlines that are written in some print media that are not unlawful can really upset some people and can certainly encourage others to more extreme activities. I absolutely accept that. Thank
you, Commissioner. I've got a few more questions. One is related to, and I've raised it with the former Commissioner, your predecessor, and indeed the Home Secretary, who's often lobbied on this. I've recently returned from Pakistan, and I'm often asked the question in relation to Altaf Hussain, the leader of an MQM organisation. Last year, Altaf Hussain made a speech in London which incited violence in Karachi, and lots of lives were lost. In addition to this, I've actually had it put to me by many journalists that is the British, there's two questions really. One's for the politics of it and one's for the policing. Do British politicians even have the will to deal with MQM and what's going on with that? And then it's like, has British police even taken the matter seriously? Because we've got a case of money laundering that was stopped. We have on record, receipts for bought arms in his house, which nothing has happened about. We've got a guy who was killed in Great Britain, Dr. Farouk, no charges. We've got incitement to violence, which led to people being killed, and yet we still seem not to be doing anything with Mr. Hussain. And this is happening right here, a few miles up the road in London. What is the Met doing about it?
So you started and finished with a particular investigation, and I think that is in the public domain that we are doing that investigation. We are carrying on doing that investigation. We're working closely with the CPS, and indeed such an investigation inevitably involves working closely with authorities in Pakistan. So I can tell you that investigation continues. I can also tell you that we actually, I have had some insight into some of the matters that you've referred to. Probably not appropriate for me to say exactly where some of them have got to, but I most definitely know. Firstly, I don't think you were suggesting this, but just to be clear, in this country the police are operationally independent, and on occasion we will rely on the Home Secretary or the Foreign Secretary to make something possible for us overseas, quite clearly, or to authorise us to go overseas. But we are most clearly operationally independent, and if crimes have been committed that we can prove and bring to justice, we absolutely would want to and will. And we've put a great deal of resource, very skilled and capable people, into dealing with the matters that you've talked about, and we will continue to do so.
Thank you very much. And finally, CSC, I asked the question to senior officers in the last select committee, and I'm going to put the same to yourself. So I met my constituent this week, Fiona Broadfoot, who's leading a campaign, who was convicted of soliciting while she was being groomed as a child. She was a victim of grooming. Now, we've come a long way as a country, and politicians and indeed the police force, in seeing victims as victims.
Sure.
And she's got a landmark case in January where she's trying to get the conviction squashed. Because she was committing those crimes as a victim, not a perpetrator, and soliciting. Would you agree with my support for those victims to have their convictions squashed, given what we understand about grooming and child sexual exploitation today?
So I saw your question, and I think it was Chief Constable Collins who answered that and said immediately, vehemently, yes, I'm not familiar with the circumstances, but as described by you, that sounds to me like a very sensible outcome, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Jones.
Hi, thank you, Chair, and welcome to the committee. I wanted to ask about knife crime and gangs and violent crime. We've seen a big increase in knife and gun crime. Can you just run us through why you think that increase has occurred?
Mm-hmm. So when I came into the Met, I laid out my priorities. I've touched on all of them probably already. So raising public confidence even further. I think confidence is very high, but in particularly some of our minority communities, I want it higher. Secondly, bearing down on violence in all its form. Thirdly, having staff who feel well led, well supported, well equipped, able to take risks and take their decisions. And fourthly, the biggest job in a sense, to transform the Met for the future, to lead us into a future organisation. And within all that, to do it with a real sort of sense of the diversity that is London, and the need for us to be a effective, diverse police service ourselves. So in terms of violent crime, as I've said, knife crime, gun crime were rising quite significantly when I came in. I believe that we have begun to turn the tide on that, but I'm not complacent. It's his early days, and
it's going up by less, isn't it?
It's definitely going up by less.
It's still gone up by a quarter.
Gun discharges, for example, are going up by very much less now. Moped-enabled crime, much of which is quite violent, some of which is quite violent, some of which involves knives, has come down nearly 25% in the last 3 months. Why has it been going up? I think that none of us really know. I wish we absolutely really did know. But if we take knife crime as an example, I think there has been something about glamorisation of knives, undoubtedly. The sort of spreading of the message that it's sensible to protect yourself, or cool, a good thing to do very quickly through social media and some groups. I think we have seen worryingly younger people involved in knife crime, and for a whole variety of reasons, people sort of deciding to take a knife and then getting involved in either street robbery or assaults or worse.
Can I just ask you you say that young people are sort of choosing to carry a knife, or that it's glamorised.
Mm-hmm.
Do you also think that it's not just the decisions that they're making, but it's the lack of anybody telling them otherwise or helping them to make the right decisions that's a problem as well, or is it just the decisions that they're making as young people?
I'm sure that must be a problem. We have a sort of knife crime reference group, and they say that to me, that there are some older people who are encouraging them to do that. Indeed, sometimes parents who are not discouraging them from doing that, who think that the best way to protect themselves, or if some of them will be involved in the street drug market, something like that, you do need to be protected. So I think sometimes they're being absolutely encouraged to make these bad choices. I also think that for many of them, they don't believe that they're very likely to get caught, and if they do get caught, since they're young, they don't expect to have a punishment that they take very seriously. I think that is a very significant problem for us. You'll be aware that the proportion of knife crime, as an example, which is gang-related, is not very high now, we believe. Something like about about 20%, we think, in London. And likewise with gun discharges, probably only about 40% is actually related to gangs. Now, those gang members who carry a knife or carry a gun are absolutely the most dangerous, and they are the ones that are causing the most serious crime, and most often, and indeed sometimes killing people. But it's changing in its nature, and so the way I characterised it the other day at the Crime Reporters Association is I do think that in some cases, the young person who might have snatched a phone in the past is now snatching a phone, but they've got a knife with them at the same time, and they're a bit younger than they used to be as well.
Okay. I met with people from Operation Scepter the other day, and they were talking about the kind of peaks and troughs of knife crime, and they were saying basically that they're throwing kind of resource at it, and it will go down, and that will be great. We'll lock some people up, but then it will come back up again when, because that's what seems to happen. What do you agree with that you can't kind of arrest your way out of this? And if that's the case, what is the solution, do you think?
I do, actually. I suppose what I would describe we've been doing latterly is kind of suppression, really. So you talked about Scepter, our knife crime operation. The last one, I think we had over 800 people arrested. We took 330-something knives off the streets. We recovered 40 firearms. And I do believe that these repeated operations like that and a whole variety of other associated tactics are beginning to bring it down. But without effective prevention, I don't think that is a long-term sustainable thing. And so that's why, for example, in London, and I know other places as well, there's a lot of effort going in from local authorities and, in our instance, from the Mayor and his knife crime strategy to look at a whole series of other measures which will have a longer-term, more preventative effect.
And part of Operation Scepter is about prevention, and presumably the comments that you made about the funding issues you're going to have over the next few years, if you're going to make a further savings of 400 million, that's the bit that's going to fall by the wayside, presumably that preventative bit.
Potentially, yes. Of course, I should note that the funding that goes, for example, into third sector and community groups, with whom both Trident and Scepter work really well and really closely. We've got some great things going on there. That funding is primarily decided upon by the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor for policing a crime, as opposed to me, but it would be a professional conversation about where we think it could go.
In relation to the sort of imagery on social media, just to go back to the online social media points, it's been suggested to me by the police that the Met have reached a bit of a brick wall when it came to sort of engagement with some of those online, which you sort of delicately sort of maybe said earlier, but I just wondered in relation to this particular issue, the kind of glamorisation and the incitement and the encouragement to be involved in criminal activity and gangs, whether you've got anything particular to say on that.
Well, I think if I spoke to Trident, they would be able to give me lots and lots of examples of when social media companies have been both very helpful and secondly very quick to take stuff down. But we know how much it proliferates and we know how much there is out there. I don't want it to be the case that after a murder or after a very serious crime, my people are looking at the social media and discovering fantastic evidence which shows, as it were, what was likely to happen. I want to have, both within my service and indeed in the companies, a much more proactive approach about what is on social media to take down the stuff which is encouraging people to do crazy things, and secondly to alert us to signs that things are going wrong, for example, between two gangs.
The number of deaths from knife crime is up, and the nature of the kinds of incidents of knife crime going beyond just wanting to sort of make a point to actually trying to kill people, that is a particular worry. And in my constituency there was a young boy who was murdered last Sunday, and it's the second in 3 months in Croydon. In terms of some of the issues that bubble around in terms of how you prevent these things and all of the complications that are underneath it, like county lines, like what you do with stop and search, like how you deal with kind of hotspots, which Croydon is one because it's a major transport route for all the kids coming out of school and going different places. Taking all of those things, if you had more resource, what would you do to try and bring those crimes down and to stop young people from losing their lives in London?
I was just, perhaps unsurprisingly, looking at the figures today. We've had, since the 1st of January, we've had 114 homicides in London. That is up on last year. It's still very considerably below, for example, the big American cities. 20 times less, 50 times less than some of them. But each one is bad from my point of view. Within that, we've seen, to think slightly encouragingly for a second, a definite reduction in domestic violence homicides. Definite, not just proportionately, but anyway, this year on last. quite considerable. But we have, as you indicate, seen an increase in knife crime homicide, and we've seen an increase in such offences that affect very young people. So of the 114 homicides, 25 of those are under 20. And then I think a really shocking figure for me is that of those 25 under 20, firstly, may not surprise you, 23 of them are boys, not girls. 21 of those 25 are people of African Caribbean origin. People who would define them, the family would define themselves as black, and 4 are Asian. So when we talk about disproportionality of outcomes in the race audit and that sort of thing, I think this is a very, very shocking thing, which makes me angry. The knife crime homicide makes me angry. Now, it happens in lots of circumstances. A considerable portion is gang related. Of those, at the moment, I think we think a bit more than half. About half. Some are just a dispute. Some are, ridiculous, where somebody's just splashed out, and because it's such a terrible weapon, it can cause death in a very short period of time, which they may not have intended. But we are bearing down in all the ways you have described. Taking knives and guns off the streets, making it harder for people to get rid of the proceeds of crime, making it harder to deal drugs, to stop guns coming into the country, to deal better with county lines. We're doing all this kind of stuff. I do actually think that out with policing, there does need to be more funding for preventative work and educational work. I think we're seeing some good benefits from that. Within policing, I would probably, at a time when I'm looking at maybe having to reduce my resources in some of my serious and organised crime people and my intelligence people, I would put, if I had money from heaven, and you said you can only use it on these crimes, I would probably put an enormous amount more effort into my intelligence work and my presence on the streets in some particular areas.
Yeah, I mean that resonates what you said about you want to stick to your 2 dedicated ward officers. Well, in parts of Croydon where knife crime is particularly high, there's one area that's got 6 police there, and that's not enough, because the problems are so great. So the idea of you having to reduce that number to me is very worrying. Can I just ask? It's a slightly broader question, but about legislation. The Home Secretary is looking at legislation on the knives that you can carry, and banning certain knives. Looking at that, and also any wider pieces of legislation, such as another example is completely unrelated, but apparently it's not a crime to put a phone under someone's skirt and take a picture, and there have been problems of lack of being able to take action on that. Would those 2 things be good things, and is there any other legislative action that would help you do your job that we as MPs should be introducing?
Well, we at sort of operational level and at the most senior levels, we have, I think, a good working relationship with the Home Office, and they are talking to us about violent crime in all its aspects, and we have certainly given some ideas about, for example, knives in the way you describe, and we would welcome any change there. We've certainly been talking to them about acid attacks and potential legislative changes there. I'm happy to write to the committee about these as well if it would help. And in relation to moped-enabled crime, which has been a particular scourge in London, as you know, over the last sort of 18 months, gone up exponentially, now coming down. We have been talking to the Home Office about their looking at pursuit and the protection that there is for a trained police driver when they are engaging in a pursuit, and also with the Independent Police Complaints Commission and the Home Office about how such how matters would be investigated should somebody be injured as a result of police pursuit. So those are the sort of areas that are ongoing at the moment that I think are good, and I would want to support. Obviously, at the end of the day, it is a matter for legislature, not for us. In relation to upskirting,
Is that right? I didn't know that was
That's, I think, the word. A new word. Probably not such a new activity in a way. It's just people have much, more covert and powerful ways of doing it now. I think it does go to a whole sort of area of law, which is about how technology can enable certain types of crime, which then end up having a much greater impact than they previously would have done. So, if somebody is filming up somebody's skirt and then they are broadcasting that, live streaming that somewhere else, that is hugely even worse than taking an old-fashioned photograph up somebody's skirt, which I can remember happening 20 years ago. So I do think this is a huge challenge for us, actually, right now, is to, and I'm not a lawyer, but is to think about how and it's much more than the sort of online world, if you like, how the law has not quite been able to keep up with technology, and how you then have laws which are, to some extent, technologically agnostic, because technology is going to change all the time, but do recognise, I don't know the answer to that.
Can I ask one thing? It's the anniversary of the tram crash in Croydon on Thursday, and obviously that was, in terms of the response, the British Transport Police were the kind of lead, but obviously, lots of different emergency services, lots of different police came and responded, and I just wondered if you had any thoughts or reflections a year on about what happened, or any lessons or any thoughts, 1 year on.
So I wasn't in post then. I have been present at actually commendation ceremonies for the officers who responded, and I know that there was kind of very full debriefs of our police emergency response and then the multi-agency response, and that those have been played into the work of our resilience forum, and I think we have quite a good record of always learning from major incidents and making sure that next time we're even better, and you have seen some of that in the response to each of the sort of ghastly events of this summer.
Okay, thank you.
Stuart MacDonald.
Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for coming along to give evidence today. I wanted to ask you, first of all, about an issue that's been raised recently with us and has attracted some sort of public concerns as well, and that's about police forces becoming, if you like, a sort of service of first resort for incidents which aren't really related to crime at all, but more related to issues around vulnerability, the most obvious example being mental health crises, for example. To what extent would you say your forces' time and resources have been taken up with dealing with such issues?
We have seen a very large increase, undoubtedly. And if I was to describe, as my predecessor did, the sort of main role of the police service, and everyone will have their different views, but the main role of the police service, I think, is to prevent crime, and if crime happens, to bring people to justice, and if there's a victim, to make sure they're properly supported. However, throughout history, the British Police Service has done a lot more than just prevent crime and bring people to justice, and it's part of our sort of our kind of model of policing in this country, is that we do more, and we've very frequently had a high proportion of our calls that come in that aren't absolutely crimes or aren't regarded as crimes at that point, but are having an impact on somebody, like antisocial behaviour, for example, and we will go and problem solve and deal with that in a way that perhaps police services elsewhere won't. We have seen a very large increase in missing persons, as an example. Last year we had 56,000 missing people. That's up from 40-odd thousand in 2012. A high proportion of those are teenagers, and the expectation that society, and indeed we have, about how we will deal with those reports is much higher than it was in 2012 as well, because we're extremely aware of child sexual exploitation as an example, and grooming. If I turn to mental health, we have up now, I'm just looking at my figures, we have about 115,000 calls a year which have what we call a mental health flag. We're sending officers to one of these calls every 12 minutes in London. That's a 33% increase in the last 5 years. In the last year alone, we have increased by 18% the number of Section 136 sort of interventions that we become involved in, where somebody is taken from the street to a place of safety because of their mental health. 18% increase in 1 year. So for me, this is of great concern, because I think it's going, at the moment, one way, and that's up. And we are frequently the service of last resort, and on occasion, I think, forgive me if you didn't say this phrase, we are on occasion becoming very much the service of first resort. I'm very proud, if I take mental health, of my officers. When I talk to many of the charities, they'll say they're brilliant, they're very sensitive, they're very compassionate, they take time, they start at the beginning, they want to help. But it's not their job. Yeah. They're not trained to do it. They've got other work to be doing, and I would very much prefer if people in distress were being supported by others than police officers.
Okay, that's very helpful, thank you. In 2016, however, HMIC's report on the Met said that support for vulnerable people was inadequate, and it highlighted, for example, failures to understand links between missing or absent children and CSE, and also issues around domestic abuse incidents. So what sort of work is underway to respond to those criticisms?
So we've taken that very seriously indeed. I have an assistant commissioner who is very clearly in charge of our response to that. A whole series of things have happened over the last several months in terms of improving people's training, in terms of some of the structures that we have to allow greater sort of resilience, bringing specialists together with generalists. We have set our standards very much more clearly. We have had a great deal of oversight and interest from the Deputy Mayor, but also from other sort of experts around the country telling us how we are doing. I can see us beginning to shift quite quickly, and I think that's very much to do with one of the prime criticisms there, which was about leadership and the priority that this issue is given in daily business. It is given a very high priority. But if I could just caveat a little bit. Firstly, I think it takes quite a while to get from where we were to where we know we want to be. Secondly, though, to come back to the beginning of the conversation, we are being exhorted to be very much better, policing generally, at everything, all the time. And every report that comes in is an isolated report that says you should be better at that. It's not a report that says, in the context of, for example, reducing resources or that demand going up or the cost of this change, you might want to think about that. It just says inadequate up or insufficient more. And that is, I genuinely think, as somebody who's been out of prison for 2 years, coming back in, our waterfront is now very broad, and we are being expected to set excellent standards across that waterfront in a way that I think is unsustainable.
Sure. And completely doing exactly what you just warned against and picking an isolated sort of type of work. There's another fairly critical report, which wasn't about the Met in particular, but policing in general in relation to modern slavery, and there were various sort of criticisms made about leadership, even sort of recognition of when the crime takes place, and also intelligence sharing. To what extent do you think those criticisms apply to the Met, and what sort of response can we expect from your force?
I'm sure, we're absolutely a long way from perfect. This is a subject that my predecessor has been very high profile and taking seriously, and so have I. Our referrals have increased hugely, 270 in 2015, over 1,000 last year, 1,300 already this year. We have a very good training package for all our staff. We are beginning to understand more about labour exploitation, although most referrals at the moment are about sexual exploitation. We haven't had a huge increase in arrests or indeed in prosecutions, but I have a very capable unit that deals with that. We have a sort of specialist unit that deals with the with kidnap and modern slavery and can advise our sort of generalists about how to respond. There are some real challenges, as you know, in terms of bringing people to justice. The reluctance sometimes of victims, the fact that they don't see themselves as victims, the fact that they may see themselves as victims, but it's better than where they were. Lack of trust in authorities generally, no other option. It isn't easy to get a joined-up approach, but I've spoken many times to Kevin Hyland, who I know well as the Slavery Commissioner, about how we could improve, and we do take this really seriously.
That's helpful, thank you. Could I turn now to the issue of Brexit again? Could you say just very briefly how significant and important for the Metropolitan Police access to EU justice and home affairs institutions and databases is? And could you also tell us, have you done any work to assess what the implications would be if there was no justice and home affairs agreement for after Brexit?
So to go to your last point first, no, I haven't, not personally. We have, as I said, talked to the Home Office and colleagues in DEXU about the measures that we currently have, how they work and the importance of them to us. London is probably the most cosmopolitan and international city. And its police force has a global reach, partly because of organised crime, partly because of counter-terrorism, partly because of our population. I believe we need to maintain that in the future, whatever our relationships with other countries at a political level. We will continue to have good police-to-police relationships. We will have counter-terrorism officers working in various different places, and we will continue to host here, I think at the moment it's 48 law enforcement officers from other countries working really closely with the Met. We'll go on doing that. Right now, as I speak, I would anticipate that in custody, in our custody suites as an example, somewhere around about 30, might be 35% of the people in custody will be what we call foreign national offenders. Of those, about half will come from EU countries. We work really closely with colleagues in EU countries, both directly and through the institutions, and we rely hugely on we use the European arrest warrant heavily. The Met does very large numbers of joint investigations. We're a big user of that particular arrangement, much the biggest. We, of course, rely on SIS2 on a minute-by-minute basis. We are not going to get involved, obviously, in any politics or negotiations, but we look forward to, we hope, being able to keep London safe in the same kind of way in the future as we currently do.
Sure, and I'm sure everyone around this table hopes the same, but is there not a degree of complacency if we are not doing any preparation for the event that there might not be justice and home affairs or security treaty? Would it not be advisable for organisations such as your own to undertake that work? Apart from anything else, if politicians were able to realise implications of there being no such deal, it might make such a deal more likely.
So I've said I haven't personally. What we've done, I think, is lay out what we currently do, how it works, and how important that is for our work. Take for example, needing for either a short or a longer period to go to extraditions. I have, as it happens, I have had conversations with people in which I've pointed out just how different and difficult that could be. But we haven't, and I don't think it is the job of the Metropolitan Police to do a full impact assessment. But I've listened to what you said. I take your point. We should think the unthinkable and work out what on earth we would actually potentially be ending up doing. And
very finally, if I could just revisit a question that Mr. Doughty put to you in a slightly different way, because one of the possible sort of blocks to a sort of deal are concerns about data protection and bulk surveillance powers and so on. So putting aside questions of ethics and what the law should be and so on, operationally, what would you say is more important for your force and its work? Is it bulk retention of data, or would you say it's ongoing access to EU databases?
I couldn't answer that question. I think it's no, I just couldn't answer that question. We work, for example, extraordinarily closely with the intelligence agencies on counter-terrorism. They depend on very different things from what we depend on. Both are important. I couldn't say one is more important than the other.
Thank you very much.
Might you not need to? I mean, if it comes to a crunch in security treaty arrangements, and there are the EU take a position which says they won't agree data adequacy, for example, for the UK, and you are in a position where the Home Office could be choosing between different kinds of data access, might not you and the agencies need to start taking a view about what are the most important things for you?
Yep, I agree.
Can I ask you, when this might seem as a tangent, but it's not really, when you were preparing for the Olympics and for the security preparation for the Olympics, how long in advance did that security planning take place?
Well, it started before the bid. So the bid was in 2005, and there were some elements of it.
The reason for asking that question is if there are, if the Brexit date is March of 2019, if it were, and we all, as Mr. MacDonald said, hope that it won't reach that point, but if it were to reach a point where there was no security agreement in place by March of 2019, which would have consequences for European arrest warrants, for access to data, for potentially the use of data that you have previously been given in ongoing court cases and investigations. At what point in the next 16 months would you expect to start the detailed operational planning in case there is no deal?
Goodness. Well, the first thing it says, I think, as it were, our interaction with government is led by the National Police Chiefs Council and by the NCA, and we would work in concert with them, and we are just one part of that, but we're a big part. I don't know. I know that the Home Secretary came here and said it's unthinkable that we would be in that position. I can say we haven't started to plan for that position in detail at all. I find it hard to say, tomorrow or 6 months' time. But I'm not dismissing the question. I will go away and have a good think about it.
I think, given that the Security Commissioner the EU Security Commissioner has said, and I paraphrase, that just because everybody thinks something is a good idea doesn't necessarily mean in practice it actually happens. So, given that kind of contingency planning, and given the obligations and the duties on the police force to always plan for contingencies and for risks, I think we would very much appreciate some further evidence from you, maybe some written evidence and so on, about what you think would be an appropriate timetable for Met and other police force contingency planning in the event of no deal. Stephen Dowden.
And to follow up on that, Commissioner, obviously, I hope that we don't get to a no deal situation either, but whatever happens, there is likely to be change of some sort, and a lot of the debates in this place and out there has also been about the transition period. What planning have you made for sort of the actual practical implications, for example, on ongoing investigations that cross across exit day? Prisoners that are held, you mentioned 30% or so held foreign nationals, ongoing extradition proceedings and so on, that will cross that period from us being within the EU and those processes to being outside or in a different set of arrangements. What planning have you made for transition?
There's a small team at the National Police Chiefs Council, oddly, maybe not, led by a Met officer, and another couple of Met people are engaged in that team, and they are looking at all the different, they are looking at those scenarios and what they might mean.
So it would be important that there was a clear transition period, that you knew what was going on, definitely.
Yeah, no, we would want a clear transition if we could, of course, yes. Yeah.
Okay, because otherwise that could affect, live investigations or prosecutions.
It could affect live investigations, prosecutions, undoubtedly, and secondly, our officers need to know where they stand, if you like, in the law. It's complicated as it is. It would be more complicated potentially in any. Post 2019, it may be more complicated in transition terms, and there's certainly going to be, the earlier we know what changes are going to be made, the better for us to be able to train our people and get on top of it.
And you would say that was a bigger issue for the Met than other forces, but undoubtedly that would apply elsewhere as
Absolutely,
well.
Yeah.
Thank you. Commissioner, it would be helpful, I think, as well to have any further thoughts you have. I think you referred to this earlier around the response to acid attacks and what more that you would want to see from the Home Office in terms of things that would help you address that. And also, I think around, just one follow-up question from me on the knife crime issues. Many of the things that you said in response to Sarah Jones sound like the kinds of things that we've all been talking about for maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years. Do you think that the issue in terms of why these crimes are rising again now is because, look, there has simply not been sufficient capacity or sufficient focus in response to this, or do you think you actually need to do something new to deal with this? In other words, is it just more of the same and we've not been doing enough of the things that we know work, or do you think we actually need to do something substantially different, not necessarily in terms of policing, could be other things that the Home Office and others should be doing?
Yeah. So I do think, as I said, that there needs to be more preventative work in schools with younger people. This is an issue which is affecting younger people, and people are beginning to think about it at very young ages. So I think that is a difference. I do think that why we have begun to get on top of it now is described as a Herculean effort. It has been a great deal of focus, a great deal of doing what we know works really well, whether that's with the National Crime Agency on stopping guns coming into the country, or on the street level doing confident intelligence-led stop search. That a lot of it is about doing more of what we know works well, and giving a real kind of focus to our enforcement and intelligence activity, and that's what, for example, I believe is bringing down scooter-enabled crime, together with some really thoughtful and new preventative work about scooters and about phones and how people can steal them and sell them and all that kind of thing. So we need a comprehensive approach. We've been trying to bring together everything we know that works, both in prevention, in enforcement, and in intelligence, and we've been trying to give a real focus to the parts of our communities and the parts of London that are suffering the most, and we are beginning to see some really good results.
Thank you. Commissioner, can I thank you hugely for your time this afternoon, and also very much welcome the thoughtful answers and the detail in the answers that you have given, which is extremely welcome. You will, I think, also have taken from our questions our concern as a committee about the level of institutional preparation really across the country around Brexit issues, and obviously it would be helpful to be in contact with you further on that in future. But can I just also finally ask you to pass on our thanks as well, and our respect and appreciation for all of your officers and staff for the immense challenges we know that they have had to deal with, not just in the last 12 months, but continue to deal with on our behalf, and to thank them and to thank you for keeping us safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you. Thank you.
The proceeding has ended.